Hi, everybody. Welcome to the September 13th, 2019 edition of Colorado Inside Out. I'm your host, Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's get started with a quick take on former U.S. Attorney John Walsh and Dan Baer, both dropping out of the Democratic primary for U.S. Senate. That happened both two different days this week. Patty Calhoun from Westward. Now, the dominoes are beginning to fall. We've already heard from Mike Johnston. These are two more names. Andrew Romanoff is one of the bigger names, I guess, along with other state legislators like Angela Williams. But are we beginning to see all the dominoes fall and letting Hickenlooper be the only Democrat standing in the primary?
I do not think every domino is going to fall. Angela Williams, I'll be really surprised, and she was the one who said this is not a coronation. Not only did Dan Baer and John Walsh both drop out, but they also both endorsed Hickenlooper, which shows that there is some still kumbaya going on in the Democratic Party, or at least the National Democratic Party knows how to sweeten the pot a little bit.
Indeed. Krista Kafer, columnist of the Denver Post. It's great to have you back. Krista, usually Republicans are the ones that will go all the way through a primary and let it be bloody and who cares what happens, and usually to their detriment. Do you think Hickenlooper will be able to avoid a bloody primary with some of these larger names coming out of the race?
Let's hope not. I hope that he has the bloodiest of primaries. And here's why. You know, Andrew Romanoff has been pushed aside before. He's lost some elections. I think he's ready to win and he's ready to fight. So I think at least he and others are going to stick in. And as long as they're staying in the race, there is a good chance that Cory Gardner will emerge victorious come November 2020.
Eric Sonman, political analyst. There wasn't one of these magical Ken Salazar moments. What I mean by that was when there was the open Senate race, I think it was after Campbell, Udall was in for about 2 days, and Ken Salazar announced, then everybody was out, and Ken Salazar went on to become U.S. Senator Ken Salazar. But this feels like a protracted Ken Salazar moment where it's not going to happen over a weekend, but maybe over a couple months. People are realizing I can't fundraise as well. The polls don't look good. I'd rather not get into something crazy. Do you think that's happening, or have we seen the people who are going to drop out and everyone else is in for a fight?
No, we'll see more. We'll see more dropouts. But the other Ken Salazar we've had in history was, quite frankly, Cory Gardner 6 years ago. Remember when Cory got into that race, that field cleared out very, very quickly. Patty is correct. This will not be a total clear out. There will be a vigorous primary here. As I said a week ago, I believe, I think this field will sort. There'll be some other candidates around the fringes, but I think it will sort to John Hickenlooper and Andrew Romanoff, and we'll see a replay of 2010, which was Michael Bennet and Andrew Romanoff, except with Hickenlooper this time playing the Bennet role of the more centrist candidate, the virtual incumbent, if not the real incumbent in this case. I think there'll be plenty of storm and fury in the campaign, but it will have the same outcome, but probably by a bigger margin. I think Hickenlooper will be a dominant force versus Romanoff. And just lastly, credit to both Dan Baer and to John Walsh and to Mike Johnston a week ago. These are all credible people. They are all talented people. There's a part of me that regrets that Hickenlooper is sort of bigfooting it in here. Politics is not beanbags, and it's not for the sentimental. I'm a realist, but the state's being deprived of what could have been a really interesting, vigorous, next generation kind of choice. It's not being a next generation deal.
And a new face of the CIO table, great to have you, Wendy Howell, Deputy Director of the Colorado Working Families Party. Wendy, there is a conversation between some of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. We also have John Hickenlooper being called a moderate, and then some people say he's not so moderate, but at least in this race he is. Do you think we're seeing a setup of a moderate versus progressive wings of the party and Democratic Party fight coming in 2020?
Oh, I think there's more wings than just those two in play here. Honestly, I think the main thing that a lot of folks are responding to within the Democratic Party is the DSCC's interference when the Colorado Democratic Party actually has a policy and practice of remaining neutral in primaries and letting, Democrats and now unaffiliateds decide for themselves. And what we see is a lot of pushback against that interference and a lot of resentment for it. I think that the Post reported on that with some of the leaked emails from the Democratic Party chairs. I think, we see that in resolutions that have been passing county Democratic parties and are going to go up to the state central committee. Most notably, just this past weekend in Denver, which that resolution condemning the DSCC passed, I think, by all but one no vote. So.
Clearly, you're right. There's more contention ahead. That's a good point. Yeah. Denver Sheriff Patrick Firman has announced that he will resign on October 14th. Firman has been under fire recently for an incident in a Denver jail where an incarcerated woman was forced to give birth alone in a cell. He has also faced a lawsuit by women deputies for allowing an environment of sexual harassment and threats by male inmates. Patty, there's a stack of scandals here that Firman is clearly facing, but the whole idea of, it's the David Kopel question, should the Denver sheriff be elected? It's getting a lot more play. It's not just David Kopel anymore. Is this going to bring up that conversation again, or is this simply a Mayor Hancock issue?
Well, I would think probably Mayor Hancock might be the happiest to have someone do that so he doesn't have to live with this for the next 4 years. Let's remember when Patrick Firman came in, it was almost exactly 4 years ago, into a scandal-ridden sheriff's department, 4 years into Hancock's term, so Hancock had had some time. Many of the same kinds of complaints, including some deaths, some bad handling, some misbehavior. But really, the straw that breaks the camel's back in this case has to be the fact that women who worked there, it wasn't just they were treating inmates wrong, but also their own workers and hostile environment. So it's not a surprise that Patrick Firman is going. I think probably maybe the Independence Institute will put forward that motion to have an elected sheriff. Not a good start really for Hancock's first couple months when you think we've got the DIA delay, I-70 isn't his fault, but we've got that delay, and now yet another sheriff gone.
It begs the question, did Hancock really want a third term, or this is the way it's going to be starting? Krista, what do you think, where do you think Hancock needs to go from here? Does he need to think really outside the box? He has an interim sheriff right now, I forget her name, Fran Gomez, thank you. I'm not just saying that a woman solves the problem, but at the very least, we're going to get some of the things addressed. What do you think is the best next step?
Well, it helps. I think putting a woman into that interim position and then even considering advancing her to full sheriff at the right time. And to be honest, Sheriff Firman did do some good things. He came in at a difficult time. He did put in some training. He did do some work. But I think it's left to the next person to be able to take those to the next level. Because over the last 4 years, although not as bad as when he came in, we do have the scandals, most recently the woman that had the baby. You had a man that was killed. You also have an illegal immigrant that was released who had killed somebody in a hit and run before he could be apprehended by the feds. So there are things that need to change. Fran Gomez just might be the person to do that.
Eric, what do you think is Hancock's best play here? He has to take control of it, but we are hearing from more people than just David Kopel anymore that the Denver sheriff should be elected. How does he handle this?
We'll see how he handles it. I mean, we've seen one shoe, but the more important shoe is who gets appointed to this position. My gut tells me this is more complicated probably than perhaps meets the eye. Krista's right. I think Patrick Firman was hired as a sort of a reformer and has been a reformer. I don't know. Reformers aren't always that popular. I don't know that he ever won over the support of the rank and file in the sheriff's department. I think that constant opposition or has drained him, and I think now he has also lost support not only of the rank and file but within City Hall. The settlements we're talking about, the lawsuits we're talking about are obviously serious cases, and the taxpayers of Denver are putting out serious money. Hancock, yes, is a lame duck. He's not really a lame duck yet. He'll become more of a lame duck perhaps 2 years into this final 4-year term. But he doesn't have to face the voters again, at least in this capacity. So in some ways it's liberating. He can do what he wants. If he wants another reformer, he can do that. My suspicion is more he'll want somebody to just quiet the fervor, make nice with the rank and file officers, the rank and file sheriffs, and just make this thing go off the front page. I'm not sure it's heading off the front page.
Wendy, this seems like an opportunity to have a dialogue with the community about this. I don't know if that will happen. What do you think?
I mean, I think it absolutely should. It's been interesting to see some of the reactions, around the electing the sheriff. We saw Councilmember C. DeBaca, call for the Denver sheriff to be elected. We also saw one of her best friends in the world, Elizabeth Epps, and a criminal justice reformer, say, well, I think that those elections might be, might be a problem since we see how much corporate money and other outside outside influences participate in our elections. So I think, Elizabeth had an interesting suggestion, which was that we really need a process in which the city council, the independent monitor, and the community are really engaged in this sheriff selection process. And I think that is probably the right way forward, that we figure out a way to get more voices at the table in that sheriff selection process.
Presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders held a rally in Denver Civic Center Park on Monday with over 10,000 supporters in attendance. Sanders won Colorado in 2016 through the former caucus system. Colorado's presidential primary election is on Tuesday, Super Tuesday, March 3rd, 2020. Chris, 2016, Colorado felt the burn. It was his state. Does the energy for him still exist here?
I don't know. I can't watch him without thinking of the anteater on Pink Panther. I mean, seriously, the voice, right? His ideas are old, he's old, and he's also got a competitor in the party, and that is Elizabeth Warren. She's taken a big bite out of his platform. She loves socialized medicine, raising taxes, and all of that. Fact is that may capture the imagination of the lunatic fringe in this state, but I can't see the whole nation going for that kind of nutty policy.
The fact that you brought up the anteater character from a Pink Panther cartoon is just, thank you so much, Chris. That was fantastic. As an animation fan, that just warms the cockles on my heart. Eric, Bernie Sanders was a phenomenon in 2016. It is not going away in 2019 and 20. What does he do to the politics in Colorado with the energy and fervor that he may be able to generate?
Well, there's so many differences between 2016 and what's coming up in 2020. Let me just tick off a few. The most important one, it's not a difference, but the factor is by the time March 3rd rolls around, we will have been through Iowa, we'll have been through New Hampshire, we'll have been through South Carolina. The field will not look like the field looks now. A couple candidates will have momentum. A lot of candidates will have gone bye-bye. You don't know exactly what the field looks like. As we saw again last night in the ABC debate, Warren and Sanders seem to have this non-aggression pact, that they don't fire at each other. That can't last. Ultimately, they are competing for the same voter or the same chunk of voters. That pact can't last. And ultimately, I believe that Warren will win the battle for that hard left-wing lane. So we'll see what shape Bernie is when Colorado comes around on March 3rd of next year. But in 2016, he had the left lane to himself. It was a two-candidate race. It was Hillary and not Hillary. He occupied the not Hillary role. He occupied the left lane by himself, and it was a caucus, not a primary. All of that is different here. What's the old line? Past performance is not an indicator of future results. Anyone who relies very much on the 2016 caucus to predict 2020 is making a big mistake.
Winnie, from what you can see, is that Bernie energy committed to Bernie, or are they susceptible to other candidates who frankly have a similar message that Bernie had to himself in 2016?
I think most of Bernie's coalition is still with him, to be perfectly honest. And I think we see that in the Emerson poll that came out that showed him leading the pack in Colorado. So it's, with all due respect to my colleagues at this table, this is not a fringe lunatic bunch of people. It is a large chunk of Colorado voters. And so I think it would be hard to underestimate the strength of his organizing efforts. We saw that in 10,000 people showing up at this rally. I don't think any other presidential candidate in recent memory has drawn that in Colorado. And I don't think that, and I think we see it, frankly, in those polls that are coming out. Because this race and the thing that people continually underestimate about him and underestimated about Trump, frankly, is that elections are not won on TV these days. They are won in kitchen table conversations.
That's a good point. Patty, do you think this will trigger more visits from more presidential candidates, or was it just because Bernie knows he has pretty friendly ground here in Colorado?
Well, as we go further along and some candidates start dropping out, I do think we'll see people. Elizabeth Warren's momentum is pretty strong right now. If you just get anecdotal evidence from Facebook, people who are commenting in Colorado, I think she would draw a crowd that is pretty close to what Bernie drew if she came to Colorado soon. She hasn't had the same ground game or the head start that Bernie had here, but I think she's definitely going to give him a run for his money. Will we still have Bennett, a hometown candidate come March? That's a hard one to tell because he could take some of the votes away just because of the local hero angle.
The Secretary of State announced this week that the group leading recall efforts against State Senators Pete Lee and Brittany Petersen have decided not to turn in its petitions. There now have been 4 failed recall attempts by Republican groups this year. The only attempt remaining is against Senate President Leroy Garcia of Pueblo. Eric, I have a hard time even calling this recall efforts anymore because they seem just like data mining or collection events so that there's a greater list of names and addresses for GOP groups. And nothing from even what they've reported would make me think any different. But I could be being short-sighted. Is there some other effects of these recall efforts I'm missing?
Yeah, there's another effect. It makes the Republican Party, which is already in shambles in this state, look even worse. These things have been misguided from the get-go. A week ago, we talked about the failed Polis recall. They claimed to have 300,000 signatures. On social media, I said they probably have 35,000, if that. And I presented as much evidence for my 35,000 guess as they presented for their 300,000. They presented no evidence whatsoever. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to make serious claims. If you want to be taken seriously, you have to understand this is a serious process. Recall is an important right to be used very, very sparingly. And I don't want to accuse all Republicans of this. This was a narrow faction of Republicans, unorganized, unsponsored by the party, unfunded. I don't know what their motives were. I think you're probably pretty close to it, Dominic. I think part of it was just expressing frustration, outrage. But when I look at Colorado Republicans, I keep thinking it's almost like, I don't want to get carried away with the addiction metaphor, but what do they say about an addict? You have to hit bottom before you can course correct. And if 2018 wasn't bottom for the Colorado Republican Party, I don't know what is. But apparently it wasn't bottom because they keep fumbling and stumbling, and this was another one.
Wendy, even some in the GOP have said this has done more for the Democratic candidates that were targeted than it ever would have done for any sort of GOP energy. What do you think of that claim?
I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's why we see Republican legislators now calling for recall reform. And, I think they recognize that, far from a few years ago with some of the successful recalls that happened, this has just been a disaster. And, it has generated nothing but bad will and, additional division within the Republican Party, which, from my perspective, God bless them, keep doing as many recalls as you want to do. But I don't foresee any of them actually being successful or generating anything useful.
Patty, will we only see the recall stop as long as the GOP doesn't need new names and addresses?
No, because the problem is people will still just decide they're not happy and they'll start a recall effort that just will go nowhere unless maybe some of the proposals that are coming out from Jack Tate are adopted and it becomes a little harder to do it. But it just is a knee-jerk response. I do think they did manage to mine some good data doing it, but I don't even think that was the motivation. I just think it was, we're having a really bad decade, because they're definitely hitting bottom here.
Krista, you wrote a fantastic piece for the Denver Post just today, as timing would have it. What a coincidence. What do we need to know we haven't talked about?
I just think, and we're not going to recall the recall entirely, but I think we need to make some changes to it. It really needs to be a sort of emergency out for politicians that are convicted of malfeasance, that are doing bad things, and not simply because you don't like somebody's voting. I think right now it's a cynical power play to overturn elections, to call an election midterm. I say, you know what, there were plenty of bad votes this last session, extreme votes. Even polling is saying that some, more than that a majority, a small majority, thinks that the Democrats overreached this last session. So there's plenty of fodder for the next election. Let's save elections for elections. Let's make some changes to the recall. And I think that Jack Tate and Tom Sullivan in the legislature are going to put forth some really good proposals next session. Let's make it happen.
Let's get a quick take on this last one. Recent groundwater tests across Colorado's Front Range have shown high levels of toxins called perfluorinated compounds, or PFCs, thank goodness for the PFCs, are linked to several serious health issues. Not thank goodness for PFCs, just the shortened name, you know what I mean. Hotspots were found around Buckley Air Force Base, Sand Creek, and the Suncor Oil Refinery. In one test, the readings were almost 3,000 times the federal advisory amount. While difficult to say, Wendy, this seems like a very, even more difficult problem to solve because it's all over town. It's not just one spot. What's the right response when we see a report like this?
I mean, I think concern, certainly. What's the interesting thing about these compounds is that they actually are not very well regulated. Even the EPA, there's a discussion about whether like the limits that they've put out for exposure are actually low enough. And so, it's really interesting to see that debate going on as we're actually dealing with exposure to agents that, cause cancer, that cause birth defects, that, affect child development. Like, these are things that we need to take seriously. I will say I'm encouraged to see the response down in the Springs, particularly, in which, there's definitely been a lot of responsiveness to community concerns down there, and I would hope that would be echoed in other contaminated areas.
Patty, are drinking fountains in Denver are becoming less popular now?
Well, it's the problem, single-use plastic or perhaps death from the drinking fountain. You've got to decide which is your bigger problem. The water table's the issue. I mean, the problem is not, this stuff flows. So we're finding it with these chemicals. The most important thing to remember is that we have to pay attention to science. We have to take science seriously. We don't need Trump pulling back on water laws. We don't need Trump changing NOAA, the hurricane forecast, NOAA based up in Boulder. We have to take science seriously. We've got more problems out at Rocky Flats. We need study, and we need to pay attention.
Krista, where does the response start with something like this, especially when you see it in so many different areas? This is just one Air Force base, okay, but it's all over town.
Well, you think about it, for decades, we've manufactured chemicals that have improved our lives in a variety of ways, but those same chemicals, though, they've got costs, and the cost, of course, is long-term environmental damage, possible health concerns. I say identify the problem, study it scientifically, set up some standards, go in, clean it up. It can be done local, state, federal, maybe even some private money, get in there and get it done.
Eric, who needs to own this problem?
Well, there's not one source. You can look at city, you can look at state, you can look at feds. I don't have an easy answer to that, Dominic. Let me just simply comment out on what's been said. There's an irony of this coming out this week, the same week where the Trump administration has announced a substantial rollback of federal water quality regulations, water pollution regulations. Now, there are pieces of the Trump deregulation agenda which I think have benefited this country, have spurred economic growth, etc. I'm not opposed to deregulation per se, but I'm not sure water pollution is one where you really want to dial it back, where you really want to give it over to all 50 states. At the same time, we're talking about climate change and other very serious issues. If you want to make a direct impact in people's lives, particularly in other developing countries, water quality is the number one way to go. We don't have those problems of developing countries, but let's not be short-sighted here and lose what we've gained over all these years.
Time for a very favorite part of the show, Disgrace of the Week. As always, Ms. Calhoun, please start us off.
Let's return to Denver law enforcement, specifically the Denver Police Department, when they stopped Susan Green, a sometime occupant at this table, and told her to act like a lady when in fact she was acting like a journalist. DPD just came through with a settlement that not just says they were wrong and how they treated her, but is going to do more training.
Krista.
You know, I'm going to give it to Mother Nature because I just read that the snow report or the snow prediction is not going to be as good as last year. I've finally healed up from bilateral surgery. Eric's healing up. We wanted to go skiing, and the snow is not going to be nearly as good.
Eric.
Thanks for looking after me, Krista. How about the Castro brothers of San Antonio? Julian Castro last night in the debate did not do himself any favors. You can go after Joe Biden, but the way he went after Joe Biden was nothing but a cheap shot and is probably disqualifying. His brother, twin brother Joaquin Castro, also prominent, has been, I guess the phrase is doxing contributors to Trump and revealing them in the San Antonio media and encouraging retribution against anyone who is exercising their First Amendment rights to contribute to someone he disagrees with. Shame on both of them.
Wendy.
I'm going to go ahead and give it to the management of Kaiser Permanente, who seems to be hellbent on provoking 80,000 healthcare workers across the country and about 4,000 here in Colorado out on picket lines, and has been charged with the federal government for not bargaining in good faith.
Time to say something nice about somebody. Patty?
Colorado's newest state park, Fisher Peak, down outside Trinidad. It's really a wonderful acquisition.
Krista.
I'm going to give it to DU and the Department of Corrections. They're doing a production of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They're taking it on the road. This is something that's so empowering to prisoners, learning acting skills, incorporating arts into our prison system. Department of Corrections has for a long time had great work programs. Now they're doing stuff with the arts, and DU is involved. It's awesome.
Cool. Eric.
Patty mentioned it a minute ago. I'll give it to Susan Green, our friend, our sometimes co-panelist at this table, demonstrating that a lady, and she's very much a lady, but a lady can make change in this society.
You're here. Wendy.
I'm going to go ahead to give it to Jackie Perkins of the Education Association, solely because when the South Park teachers announced that they were going on strike, she created the memes that are everything to go along with that.
It's all about the memes. That is all the time we have for this episode of Colorado Inside Out. I want to take a quick moment to let you know about a group that we are partnering with this year. Classes at the Academy for Lifelong Learning begin next week. The Academy offers courses during the day for adults just for the love of learning. With over 40 liberal arts and current event courses to choose from, you can now learn about the subjects that you slept through in college. For more information, go to academyll.org. For everyone here at CPT 12, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.